And now the entire Qur'an is compiled. One verse is left, and there's only one witness. But that witness happens to be from Zayd ibn Thabit, whose testimony had been upgraded during the life of the Prophet too. So Zayd says, come on in. We know you are dhu shahadatain. You are a man of two shahada. Like, the qadr of Allah is unreal. Like you can't make this up. One verse left at the hands of a person who bears two witnesses at once, and we need two witnesses. And that's how the Qur'an came together. SubhanAllah. You guys are in for a treat today, because today we have a bit of a biography of one of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. Today we're going to study a narration which is not from the Prophet ﷺ, but rather it's about a student of the Prophet ﷺ. And he's one of the greatest students of the Prophet ﷺ. They call him Al-Imam Al-Kabir, Shaykh Al-Muqri'een, Shaykh Al-Faradiyyin, Mufti Ahl Al-Medina, Katib Al-Wahi, so many incredible titles. And of course, I'm referring to none other than Zayd ibn Thabit radiyallahu anhu. This narration today from Al-Adab Al-Mufrad, from narration 287, Thabit ibn Ubayd, one of the students of Zayd, he says, مَا رَأَيْتُ أَحَدًا أَجَلَّ إِذَا جَلَسَ مَعَ الْقَوْمِ وَلَا أَفْكَهَ فِي بَيْتِهِ مِنْ زَيْدِ ibn Thabit. He says, I've never seen anyone commanding more awe and reverence when he's with people more than Zayd ibn Thabit. Yet, I've also never seen someone who's more humorous and comedic when it comes to his own family than Zayd ibn Thabit, which is pretty awesome. So when he's with his family, he's lighthearted, he's chill. But when he's out and about in the public, teaching, preaching, working on his projects, working for the ummah, he's resolute, he's dignified. He commands respect. He has this awesome presence that he has. But with his family, he's not super uptight, he's not as stiff. And that's remarkable when you think about a great companion of the Prophet ﷺ like Zayd ibn Thabit. Because oftentimes when you think of the companions, you think of people with turbans, gigantic beards, frowning perhaps, really serious about life. And he says, وَلَا أَفْكَهَ مِن بَيْتِي. And afkah is someone kathiru mizahan, someone who jokes around a lot, someone who has a lighthearted banter. That's Zayd ibn Thabit for you, which is incredible. And I share this, my dear brothers and sisters, because oftentimes with Muslims nowadays, it's the opposite, where we're kind of lighthearted, chill, gentle, and tender in public, but we're kind of like tyrants inside our own homes. I've shared this before, that I've seen with my own ears, the father talking to his son, and he's like, hey, ugly, come here. Himar, come here. Hey, dum-dum. And all sorts of names. And I'm like, this is like in front of a person. I can only imagine the horror that unfolds in the living room when no one else is there. Poor kid, man. Like, his self-esteem is being crushed, and he's like 13 years old. So anywho, I hope inshallah, that we learn from Zayd ibn Thabit to be awesome, kind-hearted with our families. And also in public, we do the same, but at the same time, our private is better than our public. Now, this Zayd ibn Thabit radiyallahu anhu, he's the topic of our discussion today. It's his biography that we have never covered before, and inshallah today, I wanted to go through his life. Basically, I want to share with you some basic facts about him, and then I want to focus on just two aspects of his life. Number one, his knowledge and intelligence, and number two, his accomplishments. So let's begin. Who's Zayd? His full name is Zayd ibn Thabit al-Ansari al-Khazraji al-Najjari. He's from Banu Najjar, which is one of the sub-tribes in Medina. So Medina, hopefully you know, has two major tribes, Aus and Khazraj. Khazraj has a bunch of sub-tribes. One of them is Banu Najjar. Now, Banu Najjar are special people. In one of the narrations of the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ tells us who the best tribes are amongst the Ansar. And he says Banu al-Ashhal, which is the tribe of Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, and then Banu Najjar, the tribe that we're talking about right now. Why are they so special? Well, one of the reasons, there are many reasons. Well, one of the reasons you want to know is that their homes used to be very close to the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ. In fact, according to some historians, when Bilal gave his first adhan, the house of Zayd ibn Thabit was so close to the masjid, and it had one of the tallest roofs. So it is said that Bilal probably stood on the roof of the house of Zayd ibn Thabit and gave his first adhan. So Banu Najjar are very special people. They're close to the masjid. And this tells you Zayd ibn Thabit is literally 3 minutes from the masjid. So if the Prophet needs something, Zayd is right there. And this is going to become an important fact as you learn about his accomplishments. So Zayd radiallahu anhu, his father died when he was like 6 years old. there was a famous war called the War of Bu'ath, which was like a gift Allah gave to the Prophet ﷺ, because the Ansar, their leadership caste was wiped out. And now there's a power vacuum, and they are looking for an outside leader to fix the situation and to reform the situation. Of course, lo and behold comes the Prophet ﷺ, and he fits in perfectly. Of course, that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala setting the stage. But in that war, Zayd's father passed away. So he's 6 years old. However, Zayd, Allah blessed him from early age, he was someone who would memorize the Qur'an. Apart from memorizing the Qur'an, some of his extended family members were Jewish. So he had the rare honor of knowing how to read and write from early age. And he had access to what we call midrash. Midrash are Jewish madrasas. So he actually grew up reading, writing with a basic arithmetic as well. And he had that formal education that most of the Ansar, most of the companions did not have the privilege to. So Zayd grew up, learning how to read and write in a home of literacy. This will all become important later, you're going to see inshallah. By the time the Prophet comes to the scene, Zayd is about 11 to 12 years old. They bring Zayd to the Prophet ﷺ, and he had memorized 17 surahs already. And they bring him to the Prophet, they're like, Ya Rasulullah, despite his young age, he's been memorizing the Qur'an. A narration says, فَقَرَأْتُ عَلَىٰ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ فَأَعْجَبَهُ ذَلِكَ. I recited those surahs to the Prophet, and the Prophet was impressed. And then the Prophet ﷺ, and this is something that amazes you about the Prophet. How old did I say Zayd was right now? Roughly 11 and 12, right? The Prophet sees his talent. He's barely a teenager, and the Prophet now talks to him like an adult, now that he has seen his talent. And he says, Ya Zayd. He doesn't say, oh child, hey little kid, come here. No. He's like, Ya Zayd, ta'allam li kitaba Yahud. I need you to learn the language of the Jews. فَإِنِّي وَاللَّهِ مَا آمِنُهُمْ عَلَى كِتَابِي. He's like, by Allah, I cannot trust them with the letters that I receive. There's a little bit of hostility between the Jewish tribes. And of course, Jewish tribes are adopting a wait-and-see strategy, and many of them have adopted a cold posture towards the Prophet ﷺ because they realize the final prophet, who does check all the boxes, but he's from the Gentiles. He's not from the Jews. He's not from the descendants of Isaac. He's from the descendants of Ishmael, as they call him. And therefore, they have kind of excommunicated the Prophet ﷺ before the Prophet even has a chance to fully, formally interact with them. Anywho, the Prophet ﷺ, he's like, look, the situation on the ground is a little cold. I need one of our insiders to interpret for me the language of the Jews, which of course was the Hebrew language. So the Prophet ﷺ tasked him at that tender age to learn a new language. Now, we know young people have a sharp memory. They learn a lot faster than people who are older. And also young people have a zeal to kind of prove themselves. So anyway, Zayd takes upon this task and he says, فَمَا مَضَالِي نِصْفُ شَهْرٍ. Half a month had not passed and I mastered the language. Which is crazy if you think about it. And the amount of desire and the zeal and the commitment and the focus, what they call deep focus, it must have taken. In half a month, he learned the Hebrew language and became a trusted companion of the Prophet ﷺ at a tender age of 12 or 13. By the way, he's so young, he's rejected from Badr. He's that young. In some narrations, he was only accepted in the Battle of Khandaq to come and participate as a soldier. But he's so young right now, he's not even counted among soldiers, but his brain, big brains, mashallah. Zayd ibn Thabit radiyallahu anhu. In another narration we're told, in Ahmad and Hakim, the Prophet asked him, أَتُحْسِنُ السِّرْيَانِيَّةِ. Do you know Syriac? And he said no. So the Prophet tasked him to learn another language. So it seems he learned two languages, Hebrew and Syriac, roughly in 17 days. One language in 17 days, the other in about half a month. In a matter of a month, he has learned two languages. We don't know if it was one after another, perhaps it was spaced apart, but he was considered, as Imam Dhabi said, Ahadul Athkiya, was unbelievably intelligent, super sharp. And later you're going to see Umar bin Khattab and Abu Bakr radiyallahu anhu, they're going to call him, in anta shabun aqil. You're an intelligent guy. High IQ, mashallah. Zayd ibn Thabit radiyallahu anhu. Now, as I shared with you earlier, Zayd ibn Thabit lived 2 minutes from the masjid. His home was used to give adhan. So, Zayd ibn Thabit, because he knows how to read and write, he has familiarity with the language of the Jews, of course he's literate, he gets the honor of becoming one of the primary scribes of the Prophet ﷺ. Now folks, what will tell you what the scribes of the prophets are? Amongst the companions of the Prophet was an elite group that were honored and tasked to write down revelation as it would descend. So we're told in narration that كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا نزل عليه الوحي بعث إليه فكتبته. Narration comes in Tabarani that when revelation would descend upon the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ would ask for me. I would come and I would write down revelation for him. You guys, there are about 16 scribes of revelation. It seems though that the primary scribe of revelation is none other than Zayd ibn Thabit. One is because he's close to the masjid, so that makes him accessible. And of course he knows how to read and write, he has memorized the Qur'an, and therefore he becomes the primary go-to guy for the Prophet ﷺ when it comes to writing down revelation. And this Zayd is going to grow up very close to the masjid, very close to the Prophet ﷺ, and he's going to become an expert in two fields. Now, if you forget everything about Zayd, you got to remember this. Zayd is a master when it comes to two things. Number one, of course, is the Qur'an. And number two is the laws of inheritance. What we call ilmul fara'id. Fara'id not in the meaning of obligations, fara'id in the meaning of portions. Zayd was a beast when it came to the law of inheritance. Now, a lot of Muslims, we don't even know what the laws of inheritance are because, well, most of the times we don't have to use those laws unless someone passes away. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect our loved ones. However, inheritance is a very technical science. You spend like months, if you're a student of knowledge, just learning the fractions and who gets what, and if you have a brother and sister, and if you have survived by a half a brother and half a sister, it's a pretty complicated thing. But Zayd radiallahu anh had mastered this technical science, which makes a lot of sense because laws of inheritance involve fractions, and he had learned arithmetic growing up in the Jewish midrash. So, having understood all of this, let me tell you a little about his expertise of Qur'an to inspire you to become from the Ahlul Qur'an. Anas radiallahu anh says, someone asked him, Sa'altu Anas ibn Malik, Man jama'a al-Qur'an ala ahdi Rasulillahi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Who are the people who are like the expert compilers of the Qur'an at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And he names four people. He says, Ubay ibn Ka'ab, Mu'adh ibn Jabal, Zayd ibn Thabit, and Abu Zayd. Four names are mentioned. These are the people, in one narration, these were the only people who compiled the Qur'an during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, or who memorized the Qur'an at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, obviously, this sounds a little bit hard to believe. How can there only be four companions who are memorizing the Qur'an? And many of our scholars, they point out that Anas radiallahu anh here is giving you a list only from his sub-tribe. So all the four names I gave you right now, Mu'adh ibn Jabal, Zayd ibn Thabit, Abu Zayd, and Ubay ibn Ka'ab, they're all from Banu Najjar. Or at the very least, they're all from the Khazraj tribe. So he's not talking about any other tribe. And this is further proven by the fact that in another version of this, Aus and Khazraj are sitting together and they're kind of flexing. Aus are like, from us is Mu'adh ibn Jabal. When he died, the Arsh of Allah shook. From us is Ghasilul Malaika. They're like putting their stats out there. And then the Khazraj are like, all right, y'all done yet? Let us tell you who we got. In the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there were four who had compiled the Qur'an, and they mention all four. So they're not referring to the Muhajirun. They're not referring to any other tribe. They're specifically referring to their own big tribal family. So that's something to keep in mind. In another narration, we're told, Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, he says, سَمِعْتُ النَّبِيَّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ يَقُولُ, I heard the Prophet ﷺ saying, take Qur'an from four. What an amazing list. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, and we've talked about him before, and Salim, Mawla Hudhayfa, Mu'adh ibn Jabal, and Ubay ibn Ka'ab. So these are the famous scholars of Qur'an, some people that you kind of want to know about when it comes to the science of the Qur'an. In a famous narration, Anas radiallahu anh says that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, Arhamu ummati bi ummati Abu Bakr. The most compassionate of my ummah to my ummah is Abu Bakr. And then he says, wa aqra'uhum Zayd ibn Thabit, and the most knowledgeable of Qur'an is Zayd ibn Thabit. And that's why the scholars used to say that غَلَبَ زَيْدٌ النَّاسَ عَلَى اثْنَتَيْنِ. When it comes to two things, Zayd has dominated everybody else. And that is, of course, the fara'id, which is knowledge of inheritance, and the Qur'an. In fact, Imam al-Zuhri used to say, had it not been for Zayd ibn Thabit, knowledge of the laws of inheritance would have disappeared. He's the one who kind of codified that knowledge, that particular science, and we owe a lot to him. And later on, Zayd is going to become a teacher of many great scholars. At least one person you should know, and that is Ibn Abbas. Abdullah ibn Abbas, the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ. Abdullah ibn Abbas, he had so much love and respect for Zayd. First of all, Zayd is his Qur'an teacher. And we're told in narrations that Abdullah ibn Abbas would be outside the home of Zayd, on the porch, waiting for Zayd to come out so he can teach him. And he would knock out on the porch of Zayd ibn Thabit, waiting for him to come out for prayer so he can kind of ask him questions. And then Abdullah ibn Abbas, he would basically take the reins of the camel or the horse of Zayd ibn Thabit, like a servant, and he would walk through the streets of Medina serving Zayd. And Zayd would be embarrassed. He's like, you are the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ. You're the family of the Prophet ﷺ. Please don't embarrass me like that. And Abdullah ibn Abbas used to say, Inna hakadha naf'alu bi'ulama'ina. This is how we're asked to treat our scholars. And this is the love and respect and humility Ibn Abbas showed. And later, when time will be right, Ibn Abbas will become a massive figure that his students will serve him. So they say, Kama tudinu tudan. The way you treat others is how you're treated. And this is the investment that Abdullah ibn Abbas made in Zayd ibn Thabit. And then later on, Ibn Abbas, his students would treat him in a similar manner. Now you guys, with this in mind, I move on to the last part of his life, and that is his key accomplishments. Now, two quick things I want to mention, and then finally one thing I want to spend a little bit of time on. So, the first thing I'd like to share with you when it comes to the accomplishment of Zayd ibn Thabit, because he has an amazing track record, he's a scribe of revelation, he's someone who has mastered so many languages. Of course, the Prophet ﷺ holds him in high esteem. With all that stuff on his resume, he plays a pivotal role in Islamic history. What happens after the Prophet ﷺ passes away, there's a little bit of a dispute amongst the companions who's going to be the next leader. Now, in the Saqifa of Banu Sa'ida, we are told that there's a gathering that takes place right after the Prophet passes away, and a bunch of the Ansar have gathered together. And Ansar initially thought the leader should be from amongst us, because after all, we're the ones who supported the Muhajirun, and we're more numerous than them. So Sa'ad ibn Ubadah and others, they've gathered in this garden, and they're trying to figure out who the next Khalifa is, and they're thinking it should be from amongst us. Muhajirun find out. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, Abu Bakr and Abu Ubaidah, Amr ibn John, they rush to the scene. The burial of the Prophet has not been figured out yet, folks. Who the next Khalifa is, that's an important matter. So they put the burial on hold because they need to figure out who the leader is. They rush to the scene, and of course, the Ansar, they're like, we're the ones who were there for the Prophet ﷺ. We are the ones who gave him refuge, so the leader should be from amongst us. And of course, Abu Bakr radiallahu, Umar ibn Khattab is like, I was about to blurt something out, but Abu Bakr held my hand. And then Abu Bakr radiallahu anh says, everything you said about yourself is true and more. It was very kind and gracious to them. And then he says, but you know what the Prophet ﷺ said, Al-Umara'u min Quraysh, leadership will be from Quraysh. And at that pivotal moment, the Ansar, they had another proposal. They're like, look, how about this? There's a leader from Muhajirun, there's a leader from the Ansar, we'll have two leaders. But that's like a car with two drivers. It's going to crash, yeah? So there had to be one leader who's going to ultimately lead the ummah after the Prophet ﷺ. And this is where Zayd stands up. And now listen to what he says. He says, فَقَامَ Zayd ibn Thabit. And man, he's got cred. So people listen to him. And he's an Ansari talking to the Ansar. And he says, إِنَّ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ كَانَ مِنَ الْمُهَاجِرِينَ وَنَحْنُ أَنصَارُ. Who was the Prophet from again? The Prophet was from the Muhajirun, from the Quraysh. And we supported him. وَإِنَّمَا يَكُونُ الْإِمَامُ مِنَ الْمُهَاجِرِينَ وَنَحْنُ أَنصَارُ. Just like the Prophet ﷺ was from the Muhajirun and we supported him, our Imam now has to be also from the Muhajirun and we will support him. That's their job. And when he said that, the Ansar lined up behind him. So he managed to avoid a potential rift in the Ummah so early, and he managed to unite the camp of the Muhajirun and the Ansar. And of course then Abu Bakr radiallahu anh was selected as the Khalifa. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh valued him so much, he made him a judge. And he's in his 20s right now. Made him a judge over Medina, and he used to be the mufti of the people of Medina. In fact, they used to say there were 4 famous judges early in Islam: Umar ibn Khattab, Ali radiallahu anh, Zayd ibn Thabit, and Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. And Abdullah ibn Umar used to say that Umar ibn Khattab had such love for Zayd that while he sent other companions kind of all over the world to teach and become instructors and preachers, he kept Zayd with himself in Medina so that he can be there for him as his right-hand person. And that's Zayd ibn Thabit for you. Now, I end today's session with arguably the greatest contribution of Zayd to the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ. And folks, every single one of you, whether you realize it or not, you owe to Zayd this massive, massive favor that he did for all of us. And that is, compilation of the Qur'an was done at the hand of Zayd ibn Thabit. Now, allow me to tell you the background story. Narration comes in Bukhari, our most authentic book, that Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, when he became the Khalifa, he sent forth for Zayd to come. He summoned Zayd. And at this time, in the backdrop of the political news, what's happening in the Islamic world at that time is that the famous battle of Yamama had taken place. Yamama was a famous battle against Musaylama al-Kadhab. Long story short, Muslims eventually won the battle, but there was a lot of bloodshed. And it is said that 70 huffaz of the Qur'an died in that battle. So Umar bin Khattab, panicking, had come to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and he says, Ya Khalifatu Rasulillah, if we do not compile the Qur'an, gather it in one place, I'm afraid that as the huffaz are dying, some portions of the Qur'an will be lost. We need to gather it in one book. Abu Bakr radiallahu anh initially hesitated. He's like, how could I do something the Prophet didn't do? If the Prophet wanted to bring it in one book format, between the two binders, he would have done it. He didn't want to do something that we call in Islamic studies bid'ah. He didn't want to fall in a religious innovation and perversion. So he's like, I can't do something that the Prophet didn't do. Now, of course, we know now, hindsight is 2020. The Prophet didn't do it because revelation was coming down all the way till the end. And the Qur'an was being written down at the time of the Prophet. It's just that it wasn't assembled. Now the situation is different. Umar bin Khattab comes and he starts nagging Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, Wallahi fihi khair. In it is khair. We need to compile the Qur'an. And now Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he says that Allah opened his heart to the idea of Umar, and he saw what Umar saw. And when both Umar and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, they're both on the same page, they summoned Zayd ibn Thabit. They said, Zayd, and now Abu Bakr is talking, that Umar had a suggestion. I initially hesitated, but Allah opened my heart. And Umar radiallahu anhu's suggestion is that فَيَذْهَبَ كَثِيرٌ مِّنَ الْقُرْآنِ, before a lot of the Qur'an is lost, we need to do Jam'ul Qur'an. So Zayd says, how could I do something the Prophet didn't do? Same response. Umar says, Huwa wallahi khayrun. Wallahi, in it is khayr. And he kept going back with Zayd ibn Thabit until Allah opened the heart of Zayd as well. And now, when he's ready for the job, Abu Bakr tells him, Innaka shabun aqil. You're a young person and you are talented. You got intelligence. And this tells you one of the secrets of why Zayd was chosen. Number one, he's a scribe of revelation. Number two, he's good at reading and writing. Number three, he's one of those people who actually compiled the Qur'an at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Number four, he's young. And folks, when you're a young person, that kind of zeal and energy you have to get things right and to impress your boss, that energy you don't really have when you're 50. So he's a young person, he has the energy, the vitality. That's one of the reasons why he was chosen. And obviously, he is aqil. And then Abu Bakr radiallahu anh says, La nattahimuk. Everybody trusts you. No one doubts your credibility or your integrity. All these features are combined in Zayd ibn Thabit. And maybe one last thing you want to know, it is told to us by one of the students of Zayd that the Prophet ﷺ, in the last Ramadan that he had, and the Prophet ﷺ would famously review the Qur'an with Jibreel with every Ramadan. So in the last Ramadan that he had, and that study session that was happening with Jibreel and the Prophet ﷺ, Zayd had a chance to attend that. So he actually got to see the final presentation of the Qur'an, the final order of the Qur'an and the tartib of the Qur'an. He was there, what is known as al-ardul akhira. He saw the Qur'an in its final form. Because Qur'an has certain verses that were abrogated. He got to see the final edition, if you will. He was there. All of these incredible experiences came together in one person. It was a no-brainer. They're like, Zayd, you're the man for the job. And Zayd says, Wallahi, had they asked me to move a mountain from one place to another, that would have been easier for me than the task that they asked me to do. But he had no choice. He had to do it. And then the command was issued after one of the Jumu'ah prayers. Umar radiallahu anh and Zayd, they made an announcement. Anyone who has any portion of the Qur'an needs to bring it to us. And before we add anything to the book of Allah, 2 witnesses need to be there who saw either the writing of it or the recitation of it or the memorization of it. And verse by verse, Qur'an was taken from the hearts of men. At that time, you have to understand, paper technology is not yet accessible to the Muslims. So Qur'an is being written down on leather skin, bones, stones, on leaf stalks. And of course, Qur'an is being written down what is known as papyri, which is something that deteriorates with time, and with a lot of moisture, it just falls apart. Anywho, they compiled the Qur'an from every source possible. Now you got to understand, they've been hearing the Qur'an for the last 20 years. The Prophet recites it in prayer, he recites it in Taraweeh, so they know in memory Qur'an is there in its entirety. But still, Zayd wants to do his due diligence. He's not putting anything in the Qur'an until there are 2 witnesses for every verse. Until finally the entire Qur'an is compiled, and now a little miracle takes place. Zayd says, I used to remember the Prophet reciting a verse. One of the verses of Surah Al-Ahzab that I recited right now, and this is the reason I recited it today. مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ رِجَالٌ صَدَقُوا مَا عَاهَدُوا اللَّهَ عَلَيْهِ. He's like, I remember this verse, but only one witness was available to testify for this verse. For everything else, they managed to get 2 witnesses. But for this one final verse that they want to put into the Qur'an, there's only 1 witness. And look at the miracle of Allah. The only witness that they do have is none other than Zayd ibn Thabit. Now who's Zayd? Zayd is that one companion that during the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, he did something. And this story I've shared before. Prophet ﷺ bought a horse or some sort of a merchandise from someone, from a Bedouin. And after the Prophet ﷺ had bought that merchandise, the Prophet ﷺ went about with his business. I think they're in the middle of a caravan. And this Bedouin now, he starts taking other offers. The deal is sealed with the Prophet ﷺ. But now he's talking to other people, and other people are offering a bigger price. So he's like, all right, you know what? He just made a quick announcement. Anybody still interested in buying? And Muhammad, where are you? He just made a quick courteous announcement. The Prophet couldn't hear him. So he sold the horse to the highest bidder. When the Prophet came back and he wants the horse or the merchandise, he's like, oh, sorry, the merchandise is gone. The Prophet was like, but we had a deal. He's like, bring me your witnesses. Now, can you imagine asking the Prophet of God, oh, I need another witness. Like, this is the Prophet of God, Sadiq and Amin. And Sahaba are losing their minds right now. Like, how dare you ask the Prophet to verify? Look at the humility of the Prophet. He could have thrown him in jail. The Prophet was like, did anybody else witness a transaction? They said no. So at that moment, Zayd ibn Thabit stood up. He's like, Ya Rasulullah, I will witness for you. And the Prophet was like, did you see the transaction? He's like, no. But Ya Rasulullah, I trust you with revelation from above the 7 heavens. Surely I trust you when you say that you conducted this transaction. The Prophet was so impressed with him that he stood up like that the Prophet said, your shahada counts for 2. And now the entire Qur'an is compiled. 1 verse is left. And there's only 1 witness. But that witness happens to be from Zayd ibn Thabit, whose testimony had been upgraded during the life of the Prophet to 2. So Zayd says, come on in. We know you are dhush shahadatain. You are a man of 2 shahada. Like, the qadr of Allah is unreal. Like you can't make this up. 1 verse left at the hands of a person who bears 2 witnesses at once, and we need 2 witnesses. And that's how the Qur'an came together. SubhanAllah. And this is the compilation of the Qur'an. He did it once during the reign of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. Later, when Islamic empire will expand and different people are entering Islam and they're not as well versed in the Arabic language, and of course they're going to summon the original, they're going to make copies out of that. So another Qur'an will be compiled, 7 or 8 copies of that Qur'an will be made and sent all over the Islamic world, and these will become the statewide editions approved by the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. The Mus'haf that you have today is called Mus'haf of Uthman. Uthman radiallahu anh, just like Abu Bakr, he put together a committee. Guess who's in charge of that committee? Your man Zayd ibn Thabit. The same person who compiled the Qur'an then, 20 years later or so, he will compile the Qur'an once more, make 7 official copies that will be distributed in the Islamic world. And then of course, Uthman radiallahu anh will command all the governors that if there's any other copy of the Qur'an, ask the people to get rid of it and burn it. Now, when you burn the Qur'an, by the way, when the Western people hear it, they're like, oh my God, look at him suppressing all their Qur'an. No. We burn the Qur'an or we flow it in water, because these are 2 ways that you take care of sacred religious texts. You guys know that, right? There are 2 ways of getting rid of sacred religious texts. One is to burn it, and the other is, of course, that you flow it in water. The third is actually that you bury it. So those are a couple ways that you get rid of something that has Qur'an on it. Long story short, Uthman radiallahu anh says, anything that doesn't match the copy that I'm sending out should be gotten rid of. Why? Because his copy represents the consensus of all the companions. And in Islam, when Sahaba agree upon something, it's called a binding hujjah. It becomes binding upon us to follow. And that's why no one today can make a copy of the Qur'an and they put Fatiha at the end, or Nas at the beginning, or change the order of the surahs of the Qur'an, because the order of all the surah and the ayat represents the consensus of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, and that's the Qur'an that has reached you today. So every time you read the Qur'an, someone's getting portion of the reward, and that is Zayd ibn Thabit. Every Qur'an in existence today, in circulation today, is the Qur'an compiled by Zayd. You just think about the sadaqah jariyah there, folks. So that's Zayd ibn Thabit for you. He passed away, some say in 45 Hijrah, some say in about 55 Hijrah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless his soul. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. With this, I end Sunnah Fix. Subhanallah wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.